Thank you all for being here today for the second workshop in this series, Financing, Funding, and Partnerships. So this webinar has been organized by the Parkdale Neighbourhood Land Trust, Van City Community Investment Bank, with also the support of Maitrey Foundation, to provide board and staff members of Parkdale-based nonprofit organizations with an overview of the key concepts and considerations of affordable housing development. This is the second webinar in a series entitled Affordable Housing Development for Nonprofit Boards, which consists of 3 workshops. Each one is 2 hours. The first one was Affordable Housing Development 101, and the video is available for your board members. So if you would like to rewatch that if you missed it, or if you'd like to share it with other board members, please do. And so that's an active resource. This workshop, again, will build on that workshop and focus on finance, funding, and partnerships. And the next workshop is on good stewardship of community assets. So how do we take care of the assets we have? And so that workshop's coming up. So please do encourage board members to attend that, because that sort of brings us to the full picture. You know, getting the knowledge, understanding the financing, and making sure we have a good plan to take care of those assets in the long term. So why did we organize this? Well, in recent years, we've been noticing that there's an increasing interest from local nonprofit organizations to implement affordable housing projects. Some of us have experience with housing and some of us don't. But whether we are experienced or not, taking on new projects does put new demand on our staff and our boards to consider very complex projects, and in some cases take on significant risks. Our hope is that we can build capacity in our organizations to understand and anticipate for the challenging steps ahead, and to approach these projects with confidence rather than be risk averse. Often, large projects like this can seem overwhelming, or the risks can seem unsurmountable. But really, we really do believe that collectively and independently, we can develop affordable housing for our community. And since the need is so great and obvious, it is also a responsibility that we share. This workshop seeks to build our capacity, and we want to build on this workshop every year, you know, maybe return because our boards will shift, but to maintain more capacity in our organizations to consider what it takes to do this work, to ensure that we can get this work done. So thank you all for being here. It really, your presence here exemplifies how much clearly you care about this neighborhood and your organization, and exemplifies, you know, your organization making sure that board members are attending and gaining this knowledge also exemplifies, I think, the increasing commitment from Parkdale overall. So today's presenters are, you know, we're really excited to have them. We hired expert development consultants. Graham Hussey is the Director of Housing Development at CCOC and the President of CADCO. He's a Board Director of Housing Services Corporation and former board member of the Ottawa Alliance to End Homelessness. Graham's educational background is in environmental engineering and project management, and he has 15 years developing and managing social enterprises in affordable housing, social investment, and food security sectors. Graham's leadership has been recognized by the Maitrey Foundation, Ontario Cooperative Association, and Toronto Food Policy Council. Today, we also have Anna Froelich, who is a project manager for CADCO and CCOC. Anna has a master's degree in urban and regional planning and a diverse professional background in the private sector, development planning, municipal planning, community engagement, and international experience with the Federal Planning Agency of Grenada. Beyond a commitment to developing affordable housing, she has a strong interest in opportunities for integrating affordable and environmental sustainability. Anna is a registered professional planner and a member of the Ontario Professional Planners Institute and Canadian Institute of Planners. Anna has worked with various projects for faith groups, supportive housing, senior housing, and youth housing. So we have 2 amazing professionals here to help us get a grasp of this complex issue. Thank you for being here. Graham and Anna, the stage is yours for the rest of the time.
Sorry there. I'm somehow in all of this COVID era, I haven't had a lot of time spent on Zoom. So I'm still learning that platform, but Anna and I are really excited to be here tonight. And actually our colleague Hadia has joined us as well. Um, just a couple technology considerations, same as last time. We're going to have a couple times during the presentation where we pause at natural points to kind of answer some questions that might have come up. And the way we're going to do that is if at any point during the presentation you have a question, just put it into the chat box. Hadia is going to monitor the chat box. Anna and I are paying attention to it as presenters. But when we pause for the questions, we'll refer to the chat box and we'll try and answer several questions as quick as possible rather than kind of having a lot of interjections. And if something's also not working for you technically, that's a good place to put it as well. And maybe Josh, you can follow that, or Hadia. And if there's some questions that Hadia can answer just through the chat box, she's going to go ahead and do that. And if there's others that would be really good questions for us to answer and everybody hear the answer, then we'll do it when we have the question breaks. You obviously don't need to have your computer on. I think we're all kind of used to how, I feel like now when you talk about video presentations and meetings, it's like when cell phones used to first came in and you were in like a public meeting and everybody's like, yeah, turn your cell phone off. Now nobody needs to say that. So you get how it works for the presentations because you've done a million of them. So we're just going to get into it. So thanks for everybody for coming. I thought the first presentation was awesome. We really enjoyed it and we loved doing and creating the content and doing the same for this. And we're looking forward to the next one. And if you're new to this, you can watch the recording and go back. A couple of things I want to say is that obviously development of any real estate is complicated. Real estate development is complicated. And I think sometimes affordable housing is just as complicated, but even maybe more. It's almost like you've got your hands tied behind your back because we want to create housing that's affordable. That's our mission. But by doing that, we are restricting the revenues that we're going to receive from our tenants because that's the mandate and the mission, but that makes it harder financially. So it's just as difficult and complicated as regular real estate, but we make it even more challenging because of that financially. And so we've tried to kind of distill what we think is the best information to cover in the time we have today about financing and funding of affordable housing. We actually, when we created the deck, realized there's not a lot about partnerships. So I think if people feel like that's something they want more on, maybe we can cover that as part of the third presentation because we're still developing the content for that. And if you have any other suggestions about things you are wondering about that maybe we haven't covered, if you give that feedback even during the chat, in the chat box during this presentation, we are still kind of developing the content for the third one. So just a few other things there, but what we're going to cover today is around financing and funding of affordable housing, and it's really targeted to nonprofit boards and volunteers to get that basic understanding that you might need to help support the projects and the development that you want to create. Could be acquisition, it could be new construction. This is information that will apply to both. And you're going to learn about understanding the basic project costs. And from that, you can take away kind of an understanding of how you can fund and finance a project. We have a hypothetical project that we're going to walk you through. And we're going to walk through, we created a pro forma for the project. And we're going to walk you through that. At the end of the presentation, you get to have the slide deck. We're going to give you the pro forma so you can kind of look at it. We made it as an acquisition scenario, but needs a lot of construction. So we're going to walk through that. And then at the end, after we've done the whole presentation, we're going to say, what if some of the assumptions didn't work out and you had to adjust your project and your project assumptions to make the project kind of pencil out, so to speak, financially, and go back into the pro forma and look at changing some of the assumptions and see how much impact it has. So we're really going to focus on learning the basics about the pro forma and walking through that, different financial sources. And we're also going to touch on kind of common funding programs and the CMHC National Housing Strategy programs. So all of that in the next 2 hours. Go. This is the basic kind of table of contents of the order we're going to follow. We'll refer back to this in a few places, but we're going to do a little recap of the last time. So if you weren't here the last time, don't worry, that's okay. We're still going to bring you up to speed. And even in the Affordable Housing Development 101 webinar, there was several slides and content about financials, and we're just going into that in more detail. We're going to introduce you to a pro forma, walk through the project concept, assumptions, project costs, financial sources, and we're going to go back to those 4 project examples that we presented last time and talk about the finances and how they were paid for in the capital stack for those projects. So we're going to start briefly with a bit of a recap of the last time. You'll remember the 3-legged stool. If you're doing real estate development, you need land, go left to right. You need capital, land, capacity, and that's what equals a project. Doesn't matter the type of real estate, affordable market. So you need the money to pay for all of the costs. You need to have the land to do the project, and you need to have the experience and understanding of how to do that. If you don't have the land but have capacity and money or any other combination, you can work to get the other stools. And presumably you're not starting with all 3. You might not actually be starting with any of them. That doesn't mean you can't do it. But starting with some money in the bank and starting with a piece of land and starting with some previous experience can only help you. But it doesn't mean if you're not starting with those 3, you can't do it. But those are the 3 things that you need to do a project. Of course, you're doing affordable housing, and it is basically financially impossible to create affordable housing kind of out in the market without any government support. And when we say affordable housing, really for this webinar, we're not going to keep going back to this. We did talk about the continuum of housing, and there's different types of affordable housing. Like if you go back to the first webinar, there's supportive housing, there's seniors, there's mixed income, there's affordable home ownership, there's rental housing, and so forth. What we're really actually kind of focusing on today is affordable rental housing. So it doesn't matter what level of affordability. It could be modestly affordable, it could be really deeply affordable, it could be mixed income, but today is really focused, and I think most of you are focused on affordable rental housing. And to create, to kind of go back to it, to create affordable rental housing in Canada of any real significant level of affordability, you're going to need some level of government support. If you don't get it from the government, you're going to have, it's a really uphill battle because you're going to have to get it from somebody else. It's just really hard to do it kind of with the costs that are out there today for land in the market. And of course, you have a mission. You want to achieve affordable housing for a specific group at a specific level. So you need to balance those 3 things in your project. You need to balance the government requirements of what they're going to impose with you getting the money or the land. Maybe it's an RFP that you're responding to. Maybe it's a CMHC program. You need to pay for the costs, and the market is the market. You can have really good procurement practices, but you still need to pay somebody, and you want to pay them a fair wage to build a really good building. And that has a cost to it. And you want to achieve your mission. So you need to balance all of those things. The process, just kind of generally, and we're going to go walk through this with our example, is, and you're probably thinking about this with your own individual sites, acquisition, infill, it sounds for others, but you have your certain criteria. Maybe it's housing for women, housing for seniors, and you have a site which allows you to do certain things based on the rules of the local municipality or the City of Toronto. You, from that, can, with some assistance of consultants or yourselves, but you know, it doesn't take a lot of effort and shouldn't cost a lot of money, you can create a basic concept. We're not talking about pretty drawings, but we're talking about basically, like if you think like Lego blocks, what type of Lego block could you build? And then from there you can cost it and identify the sources, and it never pencils out. I hate using jargony words like pencils out, but your sources never ever equal your cost the first time around, it seems. And in our experience and conversations in affordable homeownership and rental and market housing, it's not really any different. And so you have to kind of go back around the circle and refine some of your assumptions and the concept and so forth. And Anna's going to walk through some of those details. Anna?
Thanks, Graham. I think you can flip to the next slide.
Sure.
Thanks. So today we really want to introduce you to a pro forma and show you how we model a development project. So what is a pro forma? It sounds like a scary word. For a lot of people, I think it's kind of the magical black box of development. I mean, I know it was for me before I started working at CADCO. I don't really understand what it means, but it's not actually that magical. It's numbers, it's a lot of numbers, but it's not actually that complicated. And it really goes back to those first equations, those equations that we looked at in the 101 presentation, that it's a series of budgets that are interlinked, but really you're trying to look at what are your costs, and that includes, you know, the land costs, hard and soft costs, and we'll get into that in more detail. And how can you make your sources equal your costs so that you know you have enough money to pay for your project. Both of the costs and the sources are based on assumptions. And those are really the variables that you're able to adjust in this equation to make it balance out. And again, we'll get into all of that in the next few slides. So Graham, you can move on. So this diagram looks a lot like the one on the last slide that Graham was talking about. But today we really want to take you deeper into that circle. So as Graham was explaining, you know, you're starting with that project concept, that basic idea of what it is you're going to build. Then you have to make a whole bunch of assumptions about your project, and we'll walk through what many of those are. That lets you understand how much your project costs. You also have to look at the operating budget, which we talked about previously, and again, we're going to dig into a little bit more here. And then that gives you a sense of how much your project costs, and then you need to understand what sources are available to you. And again, it's that cycle of, okay, if it doesn't balance out, then you have to go back and look at what you can change in terms of assumptions to make that work out. And we're going to go through an exercise that really shows you how that works. So instead of just talking about pro forma as a magical concept, we just want to pull one up on the screen today. So it's just a spreadsheet, and it's actually a series of kind of interlinked tabs on a spreadsheet, just that some of the equations and variables link into one another. You can see across the bottom there are really 5 tabs. So there's the project summary, which is, and we're going to come back to each of these and walk you through them in quite a bit of detail, but this is just to let you sort of see what we're working with. So this project summary that brings everything together. The next tab is the assumptions tab, which is where you put in a lot of those variables, those assumptions that you have to say, you know, how many units is it? What rents are you going to charge? And we'll look at that. The next budget, or the next, well, it is a budget, is the capital budget. So this is where you set out all of the costs of the construction project, those land costs, hard costs, and soft costs. We've also got, thanks, an operating budget. So this looks at once your project is up and running, what are your sources of revenue in terms of rents or parking rent, laundry, and then what are the expenses that you're going to have to pay to operate your building so that you understand that you have a sustainable project and how it's going to run in the long term. Sometimes we add extra tabs. You can see that there's a tab called financing calculator on here. This is really just to help us play with interest rate as a variable. So you may see other people's pro formas look a little bit different, but it's really those basic budgets of a capital budget and an operating budget, and then how to link those back together to show you how your project works. So we're going to go through some slides. Again, you can go back to the slide deck. Thank you. Just to really get an understanding of what each of those tabs means, what the purpose of them is, and then we'll go back to the pro forma and walk through in a little bit more detail. So for the purposes of today's workshop, we've created a hypothetical pro forma. We made up a project, we made up project costs, we made a whole bunch of assumptions so that we could walk you through it. in this hypothetical project, we've chosen to make it an acquisition project rather than a new construction, because we heard that that's what a number of you are working on in your own development projects. But it's really very similar for new construction. So this hypothetical project, we're assuming maybe it's a formerly, a derelict school, some kind of formerly institutional building that you were able to acquire, but that it needs a lot of renovation. So maybe it was a school and it's full of classrooms and you need to renovate those classrooms to turn them into apartments. You're looking to create 41 units in this building with a mix of bachelor's, 1, 2, and 3-bedroom units. It's a 4-story building with a total square footage of 37,000 square feet. And we're assuming that this is a mixed income affordable housing project. So some of the units will be rented out at average market rent. So that's a rent that would be available to anyone on the general market. And then some units would be subsidized units at a below market rent, which is, it's a CMHC term, but it's basically set as a percentage of the average market rent for the area. And some units would be set at Ontario Disability Support Program shelter rates. So we've already made a whole bunch of assumptions to get us here, and in this case, they're all made up. But this is a realistic project that we might work on. So Graham, I think you can move ahead. Thanks. So that's kind of the big picture of what we're looking at. To figure out whether that's a viable project, you need to make a whole bunch of assumptions. And these are some of the things that are in that pro forma tab that we'll take a look at. You need to make assumptions around what your tax rate will be. So we know charities and not-for-profits pay different tax rates, and that's an important piece to getting the costing right. So that's one that will go in. Others, your unit composition, so how many of those are 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom units. Parking, how much parking is there going to be? Is it surface parking? Is it underground? How much does that cost to build? And also, how much revenue are you going to charge tenants for parking or not? The rent roll is a term that you might see used in the development world. It really just means how much rent are you charging for each apartment. So this is where you'd set which units are at AMR, average market rent, below market rent, and ODSP, so that you can understand where your revenues are coming in. And you also make assumptions around capital construction costs. So per square foot of your building, how much is it going to cost? In this case, to renovate. In a new construction, it would be to build. And also, you're making assumptions around operating costs. So how much will maintenance costs be annually to maintain the building? So many of these assumptions might be things that at the beginning, they're really high level. You kind of feel like you're pulling them out of the air, but you've got to start somewhere. And so it might be that you have worked on another project before and you're able to take some comparables, or there's another group that you've partnered with or you can talk to about their experiences. Or it might be something where you would talk to other members of your team or bring in experts. And at a certain point, you likely will want to talk to a cost consultant who specializes in this field and in making sure that these numbers are right. And that's part of that iterative process, is starting out with, mile high assumptions, and by the end having really detailed assumptions that are close to the reality. So we'll look at that tab in the pro forma in a moment, but rather than switching back and forth a million times, we're just going to go through and then dive in. So Graham, you can move on to the next one. So the capital budget is where the costs in this equation are detailed out, and this is a slide that should be familiar from the last presentation as well, that what your project costs is what the land costs and any costs associated with acquiring or getting the land ready to build. Your soft costs, which are all of your consultant costs, and all of the studies and due diligence on the project, and also your financing costs, your insurance costs during construction, and the pro forma capital budget is where all of those are outlined. And then your hard costs, so the actual cost of construction of the project, which includes construction materials and construction labor. You can move to the next one. So often the first time you set out that capital budget, the costs seem really high. And so it is important to think about ways to decrease your capital costs. So we put together a slide here to think about some of those ideas that you'll want to consider and that really make a difference to the capital budget. So if you're able to obtain land for a below market cost, this would have a huge difference towards the feasibility of the project. I already mentioned the tax rate. So not-for-profit and charity receive rebates on HST and sometimes also on property taxes. And we'll go through a scenario later in the presentation that really shows you just how much of a difference that can make. City fees and development charges. So often cities will waive fees either through their funding programs or, you know, specifically for affordable housing projects. And that's also a really important component, and knowing that and being able to put that into your model up front is really helpful. Building technology. So what is the building that you're going to build? And at the beginning, you may just have to make these as assumptions. You know, is it going to be a wood building or a concrete building? And often that has to do with building size. So often if you're building below 4 stories, it's a wood construction and above concrete. That's not always true, but that's generally what we look at. And so, you know, wood buildings tend to be significantly less expensive than concrete. And so that's something to consider. And then acquisition versus new construction. So the pro forma that we've modeled today is an acquisition project. Generally, you'd expect your per square foot costs for the renovation to be less expensive than construction costs for a new build. And often that's true, but not always. You know, sometimes with acquisition, you're opening up walls and finding surprises that you weren't expecting that can really drive up the cost. And so doing your due diligence at the beginning and having an understanding of what you're working with is really important. Next slide, please. So the next tab that we briefly looked at and we'll look at again is the operating budget. So that's where you set out all of the revenues of the building, which include your rent revenue, any rent supplements that you might get from the city to top up rent. This could also be the Canadian housing benefit. And you're also looking at some of the smaller revenues like parking rent and even laundry, income from laundry. And then you have all of the expenses that your building might have. So maintenance costs, capital reserves, so money that you put away for major capital repairs down the line. So if the roof needs to be replaced in 20 years, you want to make sure that's not a surprise at the time and that you've got the reserves to pay for that. You want to consider utilities costs, property tax, staff and administration costs. So we're really talking about, you know, rental, if you have rental staff or maintenance staff, that would be part of this budget. We're not talking about support services. Generally, that's important to separate out and to know which expenses would be considered in this budget versus in a separate support services budget. So that's important for supportive housing organizations in particular, and also insurance. So if you have your revenues and you subtract your expenses, that gives you what we refer to as the net operating income. Not for-profit developers would think of it as their surplus, but it's how much money you have left over at the end of the month or at the end of the year on your project. And this is really key, and we'll look at that in the pro forma to understand how, but this is what banks and financial institutions are going to look at to see whether you have a credible project, whether it's sustainable in the long run and you're going to be making money. So that, and this is what they'll look at to see how much you'll be able to make, basically how much you'll be able to make in mortgage payments every month. So how much they're able to lend to the project. And so this becomes a really key piece, is getting your operating budget to work well and to maximize that net operating income. So before we go to questions, I think we'll go back to the pro forma and walk through each of those tabs a little more. So I think actually if we could start with assumptions, we'll come back to the project summary at the end. It's pretty small. You may be able to maximize the screen by pulling speakers over to the side. I don't know, Graham, can you zoom in a little bit further up and start up at the top? I can read that. Maybe make a note in the chat if you're having trouble, and Hattie can try to help you out, but hopefully that's legible. That's good, Graham, thanks. So this is the assumptions tab, and as I said, this is where you input most of the information into the pro forma. So if you look at the top, it shows, you know, HST rate, and then there's a line to specify the rebate that a not-for-profit would pay. And then that makes it back into the pro forma. There are formulas built in, but it's really just to understand how much you'll be paying at the end of the project on all of your costs. The assumptions tab is also where you really flesh out your concept. So that next box there under project summary shows the unit composition. So you're able to input how big each of those units are. So how big is an average studio, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, etc. And that's really important because, as I mentioned, the construction cost is usually given as a per square foot cost. So you need to know how many square feet your development is to get a sense of how much it's going to cost to build or renovate. We also have a place to specify building efficiency. You'll see it says building efficiency 80%, and that's because this isn't an architect's design. We made it up. It's, you know, it's based, and so will you at the beginning of your project. It's based on a rough massing, an idea of how big the project is and what you think will fit on your site. So it's okay that it's not based on reality. It's really just to give you a first sense of what you're working with. And then eventually you'll hire an architect who will sketch up a plan, and then you'll replace all of these numbers with those numbers, and it'll change everything and go. And then the architect will refine their plan as they're designing it, and you adjust as you go. That's really the purpose of the pro forma, is to give you that tool to be able to get closer and closer to your actual project costs. So the next section down, under where it says upper calculator bound, I don't really know, it's not the most illustrative title, but this just puts in the details of which how many units are on each floor, basically. We've also, you can see down below, number of parking spaces and the rent expect to charge tenants for parking. We've been able to separate out resident parking, which would have a rental revenue, from visitor parking, which the city requires you provide usually, but you wouldn't expect to get revenue back from it. So that's just a small nuance. And then below that is the rent roll. So we know we have 41 units, and we know the unit mix, how many 1s, 2s, and 3s. And this is where we're able to set out how many of those units will be rented at average market rent, below market rent, or ODSP. And you're able, again, to sort of play with how many of each, and then see what that does to your project's viability. So there are several other assumptions on this tab, but I think those are really the key pieces. Well, except that you also make assumptions about your sources, and that's what you see there under financing, is setting out where you're going to pay for this project. And at the beginning, you may be making guesses. You likely don't have those sources secured, but you know that those are programs that you plan to apply for. and you want to see whether if you get that money, your project will work. So we've made a number of assumptions for this project that it will be paid for by several different sources. So we're assuming that there will be some kind of municipal grant from the government, and that's contributing $4.5 million to this project. I know a little bit less about Toronto's programs, but in Ottawa, we have a program called Action Ottawa, and the city contributes a set amount of money per unit, and that's kind of close to the amount that we might get for this size of a project. There are other government grants, and Graham's going to go through this in more detail in the next section, but this is just to show that there's a whole stack of different grants that go in, and that also we're making an assumption that there's an equity contribution required to the project. Graham, I think you can flip to capital budget. And maybe zoom in a little bit if you don't mind. Thanks. So if you remember, I see that comments come back on equity contribution. Graham's going to get more into the sources later, but it's basically money that your organization will put in itself. So it doesn't come from an outside organization or financing. We will get into that further. So the capital budget, we looked at the equation that showed your land costs plus hard costs plus soft costs, and that's all that this is. So under land costs, in this hypothetical project, we've assumed that you've bought this derelict school for $3 million. It's still a big building. You might have some site investigation studies. You have to pay consultants and experts to make sure you understand the site that you're buying. There are likely going to be land-related legal fees, so you have to pay a lawyer when you transfer land and go through that, so we want to include that in the budget, and also transfer tax. So we add all of those things together, and that gives you the total land costs for this project, which here you'll see are $3,085,000. The next section is hard costs. So again, this is renovation, not new build, but if you were looking at a pro forma for new construction, instead of renovation cost, you would just model construction cost. So in this case, we've assumed that the renovation is going to cost you $200 per square foot, and that, as we looked at in the project scenario, this building, I think, was 37,000 square feet. And so the total renovation cost is just that equation. It's $200 times 37,000 square feet, which gives you this $7.4 million. There are some other hard costs that you might want to you'll need to consider. So maybe there are surface parking upgrades. You need to repave or repaint some lines. Maybe in this building you have to move a hydro pole. Those are things that are really important to consider because those are expensive. And also residential appliances. So you're converting classrooms. Probably each classroom doesn't have 2 full kitchens. So you're going to need to buy stoves and fridges and those things. So that's in here. That gives you your total hard costs of about $7.5 million. We know that this is an early stage project and that we don't necessarily have everything exactly right. So our pro forma includes a contingency on hard costs and on soft costs, we'll see below, which is just a buffer. It's basically a buffer so that when things change and if costs go up, you have money to pay for it. So in this case, we're assuming a contingency of 15%. So you'll see that's that $1.1 million that we add on top. And so we're assuming the total hard costs with the contingency, which is the number that we really assume is the project cost, is $8.6 million. So the next section, thanks, is your soft costs. So as we said, those are consultant costs, site development costs, city fees, and financing costs. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but the pro forma is the place where you really list out all of the studies, all of the consultants you're going to need to hire. And some of you may remember from the previous project when we were talking about the development team, you would list out all of those members because there are costs. Just one thing that's maybe worth noting is that some consultants, like architects and project managers, often these are your biggest consultant costs, and often their fees are calculated as a percentage of project or construction cost, whereas many of your other consultants might be a fixed fee that you're working with. So you can see a number of those there. Site development costs, so you're buying this building and you'll probably need to get a building conditions assessment. So that's one study that you'd need to get. The city might require a transportation study. In this case, we're assuming they won't, but that's something, you know, these are the kinds of studies. And likely you find those out by talking to the city about your project, and they tell you what they'll need. Below you can see we've listed development charges. These are based on a project in Ottawa, so they may or may not be quite in the right ballpark, but we've assumed for this project that the city will waive development charges. So we've listed them here as an in and an out, and you can see that the total cost requirement is 0. But you can see how significant that cost is and why it's really important to work with the city to get those waivers when possible. Just to go through quickly a few of the other, you know, administration costs, legal fees, other permit fees, property taxes during construction are listed here. And then if you scroll down, I think to the end, perfect. You also include your financing costs. So if you are getting a mortgage or construction financing as part of the project, you need to consider the interest you're paying through construction. So that's listed in this budget. And a few other consultants that are associated with financing. So you may need a project monitor who's someone who will check the numbers basically, and a lot of lenders require that, or appraisals, things like that. So again, here we're showing that the total soft costs for this project are 1.3 million. Again, we've added a contingency of 15%. And so the total soft cost with contingency is $1.5 million. So that down at the bottom, that tells you really what your total project cost is. So this hypothetical project is $13.2 million. That's where the assumption about tax rate comes in and is really important, because if we were modeling this at fully 13%, it would be a lot higher. But this gives you your total project cost with tax of $13.7 million. So I think you can move over to the operating budget, Graham. Thanks. So before we go back to look at how all of these pieces come together, we've talked about how important the operating budget is. And this is what it can look like. So we have a section that outlines your revenues. So the rent revenues, and this is, this number comes from the assumptions that you've made in the other tabs. So the number, the unit mix, and the rent that you're charging for each of those units. And that includes the breakdown between average market rent and below market rent and ODSP. So you can see that for this project, you're bringing in $488,000 a year. We've also included a line item for vacancy loss, because even the best landlords, there's going to be some tenant turnover, and you probably won't rent out those units right away, either for cleaning or it takes time to find new tenants. And so we model that in there just to know that you don't get that maximum rent every year. And then also a smaller amount for laundry and parking. So you can see that your total revenues for the year are about $500,000. And then we also need to make a number of assumptions about operating expenses. If you're a group that already operates a similar kind of building, you may know what your costs are and feel really sure about what some of these numbers are. If you've never operated a building before, it's a little trickier. But again, talking to other groups is probably the best way to come up with these. So we've made assumptions around property tax, insurance, administration and staff costs, bad debts. So that's a number that occasionally tenants leave without paying, or that's really what that number is. Utilities, maintenance costs, which here you can see are modeled at $165 per unit per month, which again is based on comparables, but it's your own experience in talking to others that'll tell you what the right numbers there are. And that replacement reserve, so putting money away every year to pay for capital costs, new roof, new windows down the road. So you can see that the total expenses for the project are $209,000 a month. plus tax. So you're at 218. So Graham, if you can scroll down to the bottom. Thanks. This is where you see that net operating income. So it really is just that subtraction of your revenues minus your expenses, which give you your net operating income, in this case of $280,000 a year. At the bottom, you see a cell that says DCR. That's debt coverage ratio. And what that means is that basically any bank or financing institution won't give you a mortgage that equals your net operating income. They won't lend you enough so that you have to pay 100% of that surplus back, because they know that things go wrong, that you need some money for a rainy day, and it just doesn't work. And so they usually have a number in mind. So there's usually a minimum DCR that they'll allow in order to set how much they'll lend. Some groups also want to make sure that that's set at a number that they're comfortable with. So that's an important consideration. And you can see here that with the DCR of 1.15, you have $280,000 left at the end of the year. The maximum amount that the bank will lend you at that rate is a mortgage equivalent to paying $244,000 a year. So that actually leaves you, once you've paid your mortgage, with $36,000 at the end of the year. So to see all of this come together, I think we should go to the project summary. So the information at the top is really just a summary of the information that was input into the assumptions. So the number of units and the square footage. So we can just scroll through that, and the number of parking. And a summary of your total project costs. So this is exactly the same numbers that we saw from the capital budget. So it's showing you that your total project cost is $13.7 million. And it just breaks it down here to show your cost per unit. So to purchase and renovate this building, at the end of the day, each unit is on average going to cost $333. And we talked about the per square foot renovation cost as being $200 per square foot. So that's the cost to renovate. But once you add in all of your soft costs and your financing costs, actually the total, this is showing you what the total per square foot cost is to develop. So that's your total cost. And we know that the purpose of the pro forma is to make your costs equal your sources and to check that they do. So down below is where you see all of your sources. So we see that municipal government grant, those other grants that Graham's going to talk about in a moment. We're assuming that this project is going to CMHC for financing through the co-investment program. And a little bit of that will come as a grant, which you can see in line 46. But actually, most of that money from CMHC will come through mortgage financing as a loan. So you can see that line there. And then we know that on this project, that wouldn't be enough. And so that's where that equity contribution or the additional money that the organization is going to need to put in. And we're showing that as $2 million. So with that capital stack and those assumptions about where the money is going to come from, you can see that your project cost equals your project sources. So cost $13.7 million and you have $13.7 million in sources. The surplus and shortfall is showing that you have $884 left over. That's basically zero. In the grand scheme of things, it's not worth trying to make that actually a zero. Your costs and your sources are equal. So that was a lot of information. I think we can flip back to the presentation now, and we will take a pause and take some time for questions. And then I'll pass it over to Graham, and he's going to go through those sources and in a lot more detail and explain sort of that side of things. I don't know, Hadia.
Hadia, was there any questions?
I think you covered what an equity contribution is, and I think Graham's going to go into more detail under financial sources. I think, do you know how to define a pro forma exact? Like in general?
That's tricky. I mean, I think it's
There's
really
a lot of debate as well as whether it's one word or two.
true. That's true. I think essentially it's a tool that developers use to model project costs and sources. I don't know if there's a more official definition.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. It's several budgets together, which is why people have a special term for it.
Right. And also, Graham, going back to you, can you define capital stack?
Yeah, there's a lot of jargon in development, and I think we'll try and define all of it, but it's important to mention it because you're going to need to know those words eventually to have the conversations. But what we mean when we say the capital stack is that's what Anna was showing. I'll just go and show it. Sorry, find my mouse here. In this project, this is the capital stack right here. It's where all of the different sources of revenue are coming from to pay for the costs. You can call them the sources. Typically when you think of the capital stack, it's like where the money comes from at the end of the day. We'll go into this in a little bit more detail, but during the actual project, there's kind of where does the money come from at the end of the day, but the cash flow is a whole other thing that we don't go into a great amount of detail on this project, but sometimes some of your sources might not come till later in the project and some might come earlier. And so you might have to get bridge financing, which Anna was mentioning kind of in here as one of the costs. But the capital stack is where your sources come from when you're done the project and it's built.
Okay, I think that's it. Thanks.
Great. So, just lost my place there in our notes. Okay, so I appreciate that for all of you who might be learning new terms and seeing this all for the first time, and maybe you even missed the first presentation, this could all just be a lot. We're going to keep going through, and again, it's trying to cover the basics, and if you have any more questions, let us know or put them into the chat box there. So this part's going to cover financial sources. Where do you get the money that you're going to find to pay for the land and all the other costs? That's in some ways kind of the black box. So again, you'll remember this from our first presentation. It's government grants, financing, partnerships, and proponent equity. That's in general. Again, affordable rental housing is what we're focusing on. That's usually where your general sources are from. And if you go back and looked at the capital stack from that project example, all of those sources, individual ones, I think there was 6 of them maybe, they all fall under one of these general categories. You could be creative, but we're trying to kind of be general to give everybody a bit of a background on this. So typically we like to think of this as going from left to right for a couple different ways. One is government grants. It doesn't have to be the government. It could be anybody who wants to give you free money. You want to maximize that because that helps you offset your costs. So you need less financing. And that means you will have less operating costs and you can have less rents. And that means it's more affordable for your tenants, which is the ultimate mission. So maximize your free money. Also, your project's kind of contingent on that. So that's the one you're going to want to get first. If you're thinking like reading the page left to right, maximize it and focus on getting that first. So if in Ottawa, that would be probably talking to the City of Ottawa or CMHC, and in Toronto, that would be talking to the housing branch and to probably CMHC as well. From them, that's where you're going to get your big grant. And you want to kind of secure that first before you make any risky decisions. There's a whole bunch of different sources of where those come from, and we're going to go through those in more details in a little bit. Next, you're going to look at financing because that's somebody else's money, But unlike grants, it's not free. You have to pay it back. It usually comes with an interest. You might have several financing sources, not just one, and they might come with different terms and conditions. And so they might even be prioritized, but it's not your money. So it's, again, it's somebody else's money. It's never 100% for those two things. And so you're going to have to get money, like Anna was talking about, equity. Again, if you're thinking just from yourself, you might have other partners on your project. I know with the Parkdale Neighbourhood Land Trust, you have multitude of partners, and probably most of your projects do. So it's not just your own equity. It could be equity from a partner. Maybe a church is providing the land and you're the nonprofit, you're going to build the affordable housing project. Well, if they're not charging you for the land, or if they're giving it at a below market price, as Anna mentioned earlier, that's a contribution to the project. It helps offset the source. The discount is a source. And again, that doesn't always equal all the costs. And so you might have to have your own equity, and we'll talk more about each of these different sources in more detail. To start with the grants, there's many different common municipal incentives. I think everybody on this call is from Toronto, so you'll know better those programs than us. But every city kind of has somewhat similar programs. Some cities are better than others. And so that might be things like free land. I know you know there's free land out there. Toronto's had RFPs that involved land. Waived property taxes sometimes are accompanied with that. The waiver of development charges and other city fees. And you saw that that was almost $600,000 in our example, and that's Ottawa. I know Toronto's more expensive than that, so that's even more for you. They'll have programs where they give you a capital grant. In Toronto, you have the Open Doors program that might have a multitude of these different incentives, and you also have Section 37. So these are all ways that the municipality can support your project. Again, nobody's going to pay for all of the costs, and you're actually going to have to contribute something. So you're going to want to open every door, so to speak, like the program says, and try and get all the free money first, but anything really to kind of make it happen. The other big one is the National Housing Strategy. The province does have some programs, but usually their programs end up becoming money that gets delegated to municipalities, and that would be the City of Toronto Housing Branch. So, you know, it might get packaged in other names like COCHI and OFI and so forth, but often that money is all delegated through municipalities. The National Housing Strategy was created in 2017. It's still actually being created. New programs are still being announced. There's rumors of a program that's going to be announced anytime. We've heard this for a few months now, since basically COVID started, that there's going to be a program about acquisition, because right now that's not something that's really explicitly supported by the other CMHC National Housing Strategy programs. But there's even other programs that they planned from the beginning that are rolling out as time goes on. So there's lots to explore there. It's not just about affordability. We've applied to most of the different programs, and one of the things you need to know is not only is CMHC trying to create affordable housing in many different ways, market, nonprofit, co-ops, but they want that housing to be energy efficient. They want it to be as accessible as possible. And just like the banks, like Anna was talking about with the debt service coverage ratio, it needs to be financially viable. So a lot of the CMHC National Housing Strategy is actually loans, not grants, but there is both. But in either case, and even with the City of Toronto, nobody is going to give you free money unless you can demonstrate that you can pay for all your costs, including your mortgage, even if it's not up with them. So the City of Toronto will be just as concerned as your bank that you can pay your mortgage to the bank. Because when they're giving you free money, you want to make sure, and they want to make sure, that their free money is going to go to a project that won't ever go bankrupt, and then it'll be lost. They're trying to maximize their investment and create the best benefit for the community. So financial viability is important for everybody, including yourself. These are some of the programs. They're not all of the ones. They're the ones you'll probably want to focus on. There are a few other programs at CMHC that I'll call them the more creative programs. They call them the Solutions Lab and the Innovation Fund. They're really for out-of-the-box projects that might have a replicability with how other people can kind of replicate what somebody's doing in a different context. And you know, with all due respect, every affordable housing project is innovative and creative, and it's a solution to homelessness. But when CMHC, those programs that are those ones, the solutions and the Innovation Fund, they're really, really out of the box. So I would really caution you from applying to those programs unless you've really done a lot of research and talked to CMHC about whether your idea applies. I've been involved, HSC actually got innovation funding, and it took years. And it's a project that actually has a national scope. And the money we got is a loan that we have to pay back. So we still wonder if it's worth it. But the ones that are important for you, for groups that are actually creating on the ground housing, and it's a project by project, is seed funding. That's a program that's for early stage funding. So for all of you groups who are like, oh, we think we have an idea, we're not 100% sure, we're trying to do a bit of homework to figure out if it's a good idea to think about further, or we're doing a business feasibility study or a business case, you can apply to CMHC. And you can get a grant of up to $150,000 and a loan, low interest loan of up to $350,000 as part of the CMHC program that can help you with those early stage costs to hire a group like CADCO or an architect to help you with your concept. So that's really at the beginning. When you're thinking about the capital stack and where's the money going to come from at the end, and again, my comment about how most of CMHC is a loan, the National Housing Co-Investment Fund, that's the main program you're going to consider. It's really most of the National Housing Strategy Program in that fund. It applies to new construction and it applies to repairs, but it doesn't apply to acquisition. So in our example, it's a little bit convoluted because our example is an acquisition repair. We're buying a building, but then we're doing a lot of repairs. So we can't get any CMHC co-investment money to help with the acquisition, that $3 million land cost, but we can get CMHC co-investment money to help with the repairs, which I think, Anna, was like $8 or $9 million, most of the costs, quite a bit, and all the soft costs, because that's all part of the repairs. So everything but the land cost are things that we could get from the National Co-Investment Fund. If you're doing new construction, it's, you know, you can apply to it. If you already own affordable housing and you wanted to get a new roof or do a big capital repairs, say a few $100,000 or $1 million of big repairs, you can also apply to that program. There's also another program called the Rental Construction Financing Initiative. Sorry, just a step back to say the co-investment fund is really only for nonprofits and charities and co-ops. It's not for market developers. And you can actually get a grant as part of it, but if you think about how much you might get from the co-investment fund, often what groups are getting in grants is about 5 to 10%. So it's only a small amount of the total amount you're getting from CMHC. So you'll get most of it in a loan, and the co-investment's just for nonprofits and charities. But there is another program as nonprofits and charities you can take advantage of, but it's not just for you, it's also for any developers. And that's called the Rental Construction Financing Initiative, or the RCFI. There's no grants in it, it's only loans, but both with the co-investment fund and the RCFI, all of the loans are longer term, lower interest amortization loans. And we'll go through what that means when we go back to the pro forma, but it actually makes a huge difference on your project. A low interest loan with a long term and a long amortization, those can make just as much of an impact on a project as a grant can. or a big donation. Finally, we know many of you are interested in acquisition. And so if you're thinking about going and just buying an apartment building, it's not the institutional example we're talking about, but it's an apartment building that maybe it's one of the rooming houses in Parkdale. It's already occupied. You basically can apply, and most of your costs are in buying the apartment building, and very little of your costs might be in renovations. Maybe it needs a bit of renovations, but it's okay because people are already living there. In that type of project, you really can apply to the National Housing Strategy Program. So one of the things we wanted to make sure you're aware of is you might be, in that case, going and getting a loan from a regular bank or from Van City Credit Union. And if you do that, just like when you buy your own home, CMHC has mortgage loan insurance for commercial affordable housing. And there's a specific mortgage insurance loan program for affordable housing. And what that means is when you go to banks, they'll give you a better interest rate and better terms on your loan, which can help improve the financial viability. So again, if you're doing more of an acquisition of a rooming house or an existing apartment building, the National Housing Strategy might not be appropriate, but the regular mortgage loan insurance might be something to consider. It allows you to have a lower DCR and a higher loan to value ratio. Again, jargon, sorry about that. Here's a few other grants to consider. The province has some programs, but those might be administered through the City of Toronto called COCHI and OFI. I'm not going to explain what the acronyms are. It doesn't really matter that much, but they're their housing program. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities, the Green Municipal Fund program of FCM, just created a program called the Sustainable Affordable Housing Fund. So when Doug Ford cut the carbon tax, the Trudeau government basically reinvested, we still pay carbon tax, and now the federal government collects it and they've endowed it to FCM, and FCM has created programs to spend the carbon tax money to create more energy efficient buildings. And one of them is just for affordable housing. And that's that program right there. And if you think about your project, this is not really to help, if you want to make your project have a higher energy efficient and lower the cost to operate it for you and your tenants, then that's a program to help with the extra cost to make it more energy efficient. That's really what it's for. It's not your core funding, but can help with that. And also Enbridge and other utility companies like Toronto Hydro, they can have their own programs to help you with that. They might be a bit more modest than the FCM one, but they're nonetheless important. On the financing side, the second piece, again, we don't have to go through some of these as in much detail, but you might get your loan from CMHC or one program or the other. And in our example, we assumed we got it from CMHC, so we'll look at that a bit further. If you own your own house, you might have gotten a mortgage to buy it, probably in Toronto, it's so expensive. And you probably heard of a 5/25. That's a mortgage that's a 5-year term over a 25-year amortization. What that means is that you've signed a contract that lasts 5 years, and the contract assumes that you will pay your mortgage back over 25 years. So if you continue to pay it back after 25 years, you own your own home without any mortgage. But after 5 years, you can renegotiate your mortgage with that lender or with a different lender or a different bank. So it's kind of similar in commercial loans. You have those same terms, 5/25, but one of the benefits, or different ones, and one of the benefits with CMHC is actually with their mortgages, it's 10/50. So the mortgage you get from CMHC, the contract actually lasts 10 years, which is really nice for a nonprofit and co-op, because it means for the next 10 years, you can plan your finances. You know that the terms are not going to change, and your mortgage is going to be your most expensive cost on your project, operating side of it. And the 50-year is how long it takes you to pay it back. Now, some of you might think, oh, I'd rather pay it back quicker because that mortgage seems really risky, and you might want to do that if you can. But at the same time, if you extend your mortgage payments from 25 years to 50 years, what that means is how much you pay every month is less. And if you just took your biggest operational cost and reduced it by about 50%, that means that you can lower or afford to operate your building with lower rents and make it more affordable for your tenants. So it actually is, you know, financing is a hard fact about doing affordable housing. You can't really do it without it. You just kind of have to embrace it, just like a private developer would, and maximize it. And maximize that length of that mortgage so that you can reduce the cost of it so you can provide your affordable housing. And if you do a good job of managing your building, you'll get the rents to continue to pay it back. You might have heard of social financing. That's kind of, it's the same, you know, mortgages are mortgages, loans are loans. So it's money you might have to pay back, but it's a group that might loan it to you because of the, you know, the social purpose of what you're doing. And maybe they provide you with favorable terms because of it. There's conventional banks and credit unions. A lot of our projects, you know, don't just use CMHC, they use RBC and all those other banks. They do affordable housing. They understand it really well. There's something that people call the sector bank. It's actually created from HSC. Josh mentioned that I'm on the board of HSC. That's the Housing Services Corporation. The Housing Services Corporation, this is not a plug for them, so sorry if it feels like that, but HSC was created by the province of Ontario, and it's kind of an arm's length body of the province to provide services to nonprofits and co-ops that operate and develop affordable housing. And so in the last couple of years, since CMHC created the National Housing Strategy, the HSC has created an organization called the High C, or the Sector Bank is what people call it. And it's basically a lending bank. There's not a branch, you can't walk in the doors, but it's a bank where we've created it by the sector to provide mortgages to groups that are creating affordable housing. So that's something that's somewhat new. And if you're more interested in that, I'm sure Josh has the link, but you can just Google that or ask us later with our contact. And in Ontario, Infrastructure Ontario, it's also part of the province of Ontario, but it provides mortgages and lending to municipalities who do big infrastructure projects. But it can also lend to nonprofits and charities who do affordable housing, and you don't have to be Toronto Community Housing. You could just be any nonprofit and charity. We've done it for many of our projects, and sometimes that's the better place to go. A few ideas to think about to increase your financing, because again, if you increase your financing, you can decrease your equity, which is the hardest thing to get in my mind. So again, CMHC's motto of low interest loans and long amortization terms, that helps. I kind of explained that earlier, and we'll demonstrate that in our pro forma when we go back to it. Second mortgages or social finances or green loans. The Toronto Atmospheric Fund has something called a green loan, where they will basically provide a loan to help offset your costs. Could be new development or acquisition. And what they're really trying to loan is groups who do energy efficient projects. So if you were, for instance, doing a project where you were like, okay, we want it to be more energy efficient. We're gonna buy a better mechanical system, boilers and things like that, so that we pay less in utility bills. Then the Toronto Atmospheric Fund, their green loan, will basically help pay for the capital cost, the upfront cost of your green infrastructure in your building, and then you pay them back when you have the savings from the utility company. So you don't have to have the money up front. And then eventually when you've paid them off, they can probably tell you the estimate of how long that takes, then you just get the savings. So again, it helps with the upfront costs. Loan guarantees, that's when a municipality or maybe even a community foundation might say, hey, if this group can't pay this loan, it's just like when your parents help you with your down payment when you buy your first home. It happens all the time. I know the city of Toronto did it when CSI bought its building on Spadina. They did a loan guarantee. That again is something that if you had a loan guarantee, it's not a source of revenue, but when you go to banks and to other people who are contributing sources of revenue, you can say, yeah, we've got a loan guarantee, and that makes them feel more confident in your project financially. Rent supplements or operational funding that you might get from the municipality. In the future, people are going to call those the Canadian Housing Benefit, and they'll come from CMHC. Property tax exemptions. All of these things will help increase your net operating income and can help increase your financing. The partnerships, we've talked about this. You might have multiple partners who might play different roles, and each of them can contribute. They might each own part of the building, and so if you have equity that's needed for the project, then you can share the equity need or contribution. Or maybe you own the building, but you have a partner who might, maybe it's a mixed use building, and you have a partner who leases the ground floor, and their rent helps you get financing and pay for the cost of the building. It could be a partner who provides land. Comes in all different forms, but what we kind of are trying to demonstrate here is it's not always about going to the government. You need to look at civil society and other nonprofits in your neighborhood to see how they can benefit and how you can both contribute together. And then equity, people asked about this before. We're not going to go into the details of any of these, but this is just to kind of demonstrate what is equity and where might it come from. But if you wanted to talk more about different experiences, we could go into that in more detail. It might have to be offline from this training, but it could just be cash. CADCO is related to CCOC in Ottawa, and they own 1,600 apartments. And so we don't plan to lose money, even though we're a not-for-profit. And so that means we plan to make money or a surplus. And every year, if we do that well, we can save that. And over time, we can take those savings and use that as equity in the project. Or if we have surplus land, that a parking lot or just an empty part of a lot, and we want to build the project there, meaning we already have the land, we don't have to pay for it. We can go to an appraiser, value the land to say how much it's worth. And since we're contributing that, that is equity contribution. The land, the appraised land is part of the total cost, and that contribution is part of it. And that can be millions of dollars. If you're a charity, you might fundraise for the money. And we've been part of projects that have fundraised in Ottawa, again, not as big as Toronto, millions of dollars. 3, 4, we're working on a project right now that is fundraising $5 million in cash to the project. That's not even the free land they got from the government, which was valued at over $3 million. Other groups, again, going back to the CCOC example where we have 1,600 apartments and about 50 buildings, some of our buildings are quite old and they've paid off their mortgage, and we could get a mortgage on that property, and that mortgage could help contribute to the equity of a new project, just to demonstrate how one asset, one building can contribute to another. So, okay, that was really all of the data dump. And now we're going to kind of bring it together to go back to that example from the beginning to talk about how we kind of brought that project together and what happens if there's something changes. So to go back to that kind of recycling logo takeoff, we created a project concept. We from there made some assumptions, created a capital budget and an operating budget, and we identified the financial sources. And as Anna kind of walked through there, it looked like it penciled out. But what if things changed? We actually, when we work on a project, every time we kind of go through this, around this circle, kind of theoretically or hypothetically, we make a new update to our forma and save the different versions. And at the end of the project, if we look back, we might have 100 different versions. So you could think of us going around the circle 100 times. It can get busy at certain points. And sometimes we're tweaking small things. It's just the rent roll. We can't afford something, so we need to increase the revenues. Or maybe the costs, we got lucky, the cost came under budget and we wanted to lower the rent revenues. Other times it could be quite a bit changes. And you need to make sure those assumptions pencil out. So $2 million is a lot of money. And what if down the road, as we progressed on the project, we realized, you know what, we just can't do that. We want to do fundraising. We started to do some fundraising and we realized that 2 million was too much. We're partway there, but we actually think we can only fundraise $1 million. What do we do? That's $1 million less in sources. But the project's advanced. We'd updated the concept, we got some new drawings, and then we went and got, maybe we hired a builder, and the builder went out and got an estimate on the cost. We got our construction cost estimate updated, and it went from $200 to $220 a square foot. What change would that make to our project? So I'm going to flip back and just, it's an Excel document, and most developers use Excel. Sometimes developers, like in today's world, there's actually apps that basically embed all these formulas from our Excel pro forma into an app. But I find with affordable housing, there's nothing really that actually works that well. And so Excel is really the most reliable thing, and everybody's familiar with it, and you can edit it as it fits for your project. But the Evergreen Foundation, they did actually something where they created called the Ontario Affordable Housing Calculator, and it's a little bit of an online one for affordable housing. So you might want to check that out. So again, okay, back on task, our project costs went up. I'm going to go and do the assumptions, and it was $200 a square foot, and it's $220. Again, going to the project summary, this all penciled out within $1,000, right? So we're going to change this, and it's not going to pencil out. So that we're going to change to 220, and our theoretical group only has $1 million. So that decreased our, grant sources or funding sources by $1 million. Let's go over to the project summary, and that's created a shortfall in red of $2 million. We know we reduced our equity by $1 million, so that actually made a $1 million change. But if I go back and undo that and put that back to 2 million, you can actually see that changing the project costs, increasing them from $200 a square foot to 220, increased the equity by, or increased the shortfall by $1 million. It made $1 million difference to the project. And so did the equity change to $1 million. So that now leaves us $2 million short. So there's lots of different things you could change here. And again, this is assuming your project's at an early stage. You're just trying to figure out if it's feasible. And so your project really does exist in a pro forma. It's sometimes we call it architecture by numbers, which is kind of crude, but all due respect to architects. So we're just going to change a few assumptions to demonstrate how you can work backwards to make that shortfall $0. So the first thing I'm going to do is, one of the things I said is we actually had advanced the project, we updated the drawings, and then we went out and got a new cost estimate, and the project cost went up. So yes, the project cost did go up, but we've advanced the drawings, and so we're feeling more comfortable with that newer project cost estimate because we've advanced the drawings. So we increased the capital costs, but I'm going to reduce the contingency. And I'm going to reduce it from 15 to 10% because we've advanced the drawings. We're feeling a little bit more comfortable with that. Let's see what that difference makes, 15 to 10. Again, $2 million. That right there, that just made a $500,000 difference. And if I change this, the soft cost contingency to 10 as well, that'll probably make it round it right off to, well, that made $75,000 more difference. We've just reduced it to below 1.5. So I'm going to leave that as it is. We've talked a lot about the interest rates and how important that is in the operating budget. So if you go over to this operating budget, remember about $500,000 in rent, we have about $220,000 in like operating costs. And then we have $245,000 in a mortgage each year that you're paying on that $7 million mortgage. So if we go over to the financing calculator, our interest rate assumption right now is 2.5%. And we're assuming we get this from CMHC. So we're going for one of those low interest, long-term, sorry, this is a bit harder to see, long-term mortgages. So it's 10-year term over 50-year amortization. And there's a whole bunch, as Anna said, a whole bunch of formulas built into the background here. I don't know if you heard today, but there was an announcement from the Bank of Canada, and they didn't increase the interest rates again. So we still have that super low rate. And actually, if you went to CMHC right now and you got one of these loans from them, you would actually pay 0.5% interest rate for your first 10 years. So we can't put 0.5% in because our project's theoretical. It's not going to get built for a couple of years. We don't know when we're going to lock in our rate. Maybe it's a year or two from now. Maybe the rates will go up. You have to be cautious at the beginning. But 0.5% is really low to be honest, if you talk to experts, they're going to say it's not going anywhere for probably at least a year or more. So, and it's not going anywhere, you know, the global economic situation is probably not going to change drastically for several years. So what if we just change this from 2.5 to 2%? And again, we're going from about 1.5 million shortfall. That just made about a $725,000 difference on our equity, just reducing our interest rate. We sometimes like to dream and we're like, oh, what if the project started right now? If you actually did this project right now and you got your rate at 0.5% and everything else turned out true, just to show you how powerful that interest rate is, you'd have a surplus of $2.35 million. Now, if you go to CMHC right now and presented your project, you couldn't present a 0.5 interest rate. They would say, you have to show us that this works at a higher interest rate to make sure that it's viable in the future when you lock it in. And they probably would keep it at 2% or thereabouts. So I'm going to put it back, but just to say that the biggest expense on your project is it's the capital cost, that hard cost, and it's this interest rate. So that is huge. So take it back to that too. Our shortfall is still that $725,000. And let's go back to the operating budget. Again, we said the operating budget can make a bigger difference in the capital budget because everything is amortized in your mortgage. So to demonstrate that, it's Toronto. What if you got a property tax exemption? Right now, we're estimating you're paying $40,000 a year. Of the $220,000 is in property taxes. I'm just going to go back and, is that in here? No, that's just embedded in there. Sorry, it's just embedded in here. And I'm just going to take that to zero to see what difference that makes from our $725,000. I think that's what it is. Confused myself. $728,000 shortfall. So turn this to zero. That made a $1.1 million difference on the project. By getting property tax exemptions, you were able, or this group was able, to get $1.1 million more in a loan from CMHC at that 2% interest rate. And if it was actually a 0.5% interest rate, it probably would have been several $1 million. So those were just a few examples: contingency, mortgage interest rate, property tax, where you can adjust them to go the other way. And what you're going to find is, as you go through the initial stages of your project all the way up to construction, when things start to become a bit more certain, you're going to be continually modifying things because costs will go up or down, or something, you'll discover something you didn't know. So we're going to flip back here and come back to the presentation, one quick slide, and then get to some questions. So a few just overall takeaways from all of this. Again, keep in mind that it's not all about you. Obviously, you're trying to create affordable housing and you have somebody or some family in mind when you think about that, and that's what you need to think about. But you need to balance out your mission, which is what is that family or that person you're going to house, with the government criteria, because it's going to be frustrating at times. Their criteria is not exactly how you want to do it. But you're going to have to compromise, or sometimes you're going to have to put your foot down and try and negotiate them to change their criteria. But you have to kind of juggle that bowling pin. And then there's the market. Costs are going up all the time: land and hard and soft costs and consultant costs, and rents are going up, and things are going in all different directions. But the costs are the costs. You might get some things deferred, or you might get some things for free, like land, or reduced. But a lot of the things you're going to have to pay for, and you might try and have some strategies to get lower costs, but they are what they are. So you have to juggle all of those things. So as Anna said, getting land at a below market price is often kind of the gateway to starting a project. It's like the instigator. You have surplus land, a church wants to do something, the government has land. If not, you can really spin your wheels. Reducing the costs in your operating budget or increasing your revenue by getting rent subs or adjusting the rental affordability, those things make a much bigger impact than reducing your costs in your capital budget. It seems so natural just to focus on lowering your operating costs. Like, what if we did you know, less expensive tiles, or can we change the countertops? And you'll want to consider all the small little things like that, but they actually don't make the big difference. They're not going to make the $100,000, $1 million difference. When the builder gives you your budget, it's broken down into about 50 or 60 different items. So that like $9 million in the capital cost, it'll say how much you're going to pay for in flooring and in drywall and all those things. And even at that, there's only a few items that make up the big numbers. And so I really encourage you to focus on the big numbers. There's so many numbers that and you'll want to save in all of them or maximize them, but make sure you focus on the big ones and spend your time on that. Every project needs grants. Everyone will basically need financing, and everyone will need equity. Don't deny that. Don't think that you can kind of do something that nobody else has done. Accept that you're going to need government grants. Accept that you're going to try and get reduced land. Accept that you're going to need a loan, and accept that you're going to need equity, and then reposition it to be like, how do we maximize those things rather than how do we not contribute any equity? Think about how can you maximize your equity? Because if you can maximize it, you can operate your building with more affordable rents and maximize your mission, which is what you really want to maximize. So maximize your money to maximize the mission. You're only ever going to do a project if you have a viable operating budget. So when you're talking about it penciling out, it's actually the operating budget that needs to pencil out. Can you afford your mortgage and your operating costs? And then the mortgage is what relates, sorry, my head is my instrument there, but the mortgage is what relates back to the capital budget. Even though you're doing a capital project, it's the operating budget that you need to balance. Grants come from all levels of government, and you'll want to consider them all, and also non-government grants. And CMHC's National Housing Strategy is mostly loans, but they're really important. So that's the end of the content. We're going to pause for questions here, Anna, or after our examples. I think we were thinking after our examples. We have 4 examples we're going to go through quickly, and then we'll pause for questions. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
So these are the same examples as before, but we're just going to give a bit more info on the financial part of the projects and what kind of happened or how do we make it happen in each of these. These are all projects we worked on. So this is a CCOC project. So again, it's 5 buildings, 254 units. What you're just seeing is one of them in the foreground. It's mixed income. So there's some tenants are paying like RGI, rent geared to income. Some tenants are getting a modest subsidy, like Anna talked about, the below market rent, and other tenants are just paying market rent. It could actually be anybody like you or me who has a job, who is gainfully employed, who just is living in rental housing, not getting a discount, they're not off a waiting list. But the BMR and the rent supplements, those tenants, they're all off of a waiting list of some sort. They were pre-qualified. It cost us about $250,000 an apartment. It included free land from the city. It actually was a former federal government site, but it was $65 million because it's so big. 40 million of it is in loans. There's actually several loans on it. There's a couple loans from Infrastructure Ontario's because there's different buildings. And we have a second mortgage loan. You could think of this as social financing from a Catholic nun sisterhood called the Grey Sisters. They're from Pembroke in the Ottawa Valley. And we've done several projects with CCOC where they've provided second mortgage loans, which when the bank looks at it, they think of it as equity. It's kind of subservient in order. So if we went bankrupt, the bank, which in this case was Infrastructure Ontario, will get paid back first, and then the nuns would get paid back second. We got a big grant, and we contributed equity ourselves from savings over the years from our other apartments. Actually, one of the other interesting aspects of this project, kind of going back to the green loan aspect, is this project is pretty big, and with the scale, we were able to do a district geothermal plant. And we did a partnership with a private utility company called Corix, and they paid for the plant. It cost about $2 million. And we pay them back for that over time from revenues we get from our tenants. and there's a kind of a savings in that with us. So basically, we took about $2 million of our capital cost, and a private company paid for that, and they get their money back as we operate the building, which just meant that we didn't have to find $2 million of a grant or a mortgage. It helps. In essence, it is a different loan. This was an acquisition rehab, so kind of a little bit like our project example, actually quite a bit. This project actually cost, I think it was about $2 million to buy the building, and it was about $6 million in construction to renovate it. It was a big renovation. It was a former nun's residence, and we turned it into 40 or 42 bachelor apartments for women, formerly homeless women. All of them are paying Ontario Works, Ontario Disability kind of shelter rent. And there's no loan here. There was no surplus or net operating income. When you look at the rents from the tenants, there's no operating funding. There's no rent subs. So there was no surplus. All the rent goes to pay for the operating costs. When you're only getting about $400 to $500 in rental income per tenant per month, because that's what ODSP is in Ontario Works, you're not really, Wisdom is going to say you're not going to make any surplus off of that. It costs about $500 or $600 in our experiences. It might be slightly different in Toronto, but it might cost $500 or $600 for your operating costs. And so you need to get your rents above that per unit per month to get enough rent to get a mortgage, if that makes sense. So if you had $1,000 in rent and your operating costs are $1,000 in per month, and your operating costs were $500, then you're getting $500 in money you can use for your mortgage. So this one had quite a bit of fundraising, and actually the sisters, when they sold the land, they sold it to a private developer, and they severed, which included quite a bit of green space the private developer wanted to develop their market building, and they severed the existing building and sold it to our client, Cornerstone Housing for Women. But when the sisters made the land deal to sell it to the private developer, they made an agreement that the private developer, they'd sell it for $1 million below market, and the private developer would then sell it to Cornerstone for $1 million below market. So that's part of the capital stack. That was a discount below the market. And as you can see here, because it was an acquisition rehab, it cost $157,000 an apartment. It's also bachelors and not families, so that contributes to it, versus the new construction. Anna?
So this is the King's Daughters and Sons seniors apartment building. It's a recently completed project. This is one that Hadia worked on, actually. So this project, it's 58 units, but it's actually an addition of 58 units to an existing seniors apartment building that King's Daughters and Sons has been operating for years. So they already owned the land, so they didn't have to purchase any land or have land costs, and they were able to build this addition onto that. So this project received grants from the City of Ottawa of about $7 million. They also have mortgage financing, and in this case, it was through CMHC's rental construction financing, the RCFI program, and they also received some of those fee waivers from the city that made a big difference. They were able to contribute equity to the project in a way because the existing apartment building, they'd actually already paid off their mortgage. So they were able to use their operating surplus from those existing apartments to help pay for the financing to cover the new building. So in a way, that's their equity contribution here. It raised their net operating income and allowed them to access more financing. I think you can move on to the next one. So this is our last example, and then we will take questions because I think there was a lot of information there. This is the Christchurch Fells Corners project in Ottawa. We're currently working on it and hoping to start construction next month. It is a 35-unit mixed affordable housing. So like our hypothetical examples, some of the rents will be at market rent, below market, or ODSP. It's also a mixed use building. So this is an example of a tenant partner. So the ground floor of this building has office and program space for a local food bank and a community resource center that have longstanding ties with the church and the community, and they will be paying rent as tenants to the building, which is helping make the operating budget balance out. It's on land, it's directly next to the church of Christ Church Bells Corners on the site of their former rectory. So they're demolishing the rectory to build this building, and they're contributing the land to the project. So that was kind of the impetus for the project, and allows it free land. So this project has also received grant funding from the city through their Action Ottawa program. We're working now on securing a mortgage and loan through CMHC's co-investment program. And the church and the diocese and the whole Anglican community in Ottawa are working on a fundraising campaign to cover that equity, and have committed $1 million, raising $1 million to the project. So that's how we're making this one work. So I think that's it for our examples, and we'll open it up.
Peter had a question. Since there are banks in Europe currently offering negative interest rates on loans, can non-for-profits obtain financing from foreign financial institutions?
I cannot answer that question. Very good question. And I've heard that as well. I just not sure exactly what that means. Negative, like I kind of know what it means, but I've never heard an example of a housing group doing it. So maybe something worth exploring, but you get pretty close with the CMHC product.
Can I make a point?
Sure.
There is a thing with the difference in currency. When you exchange it for currency, you may not make quite as much back depending on what you need to transfer for it. So if you were going to do that with the European people or wherever you're getting it from, you may want to take into account the currency exchange rate. It may not work out quite the way you want.
Yeah. Good point. Any other questions?
Feel free to ask, even not through the chat, if anyone has anything.
Well, I'm on the phone, so I don't really have the chat.
Do you have any other questions?
When you were talking about the Performa, to me it did sound, and you did mention it was with the Excel. I was going to point out, I'm a little bit quiet, and you talk very loudly, so I wasn't sure when to jump in. But I was going to point out it sounded like a very structured Excel thing. Just a way to keep track of where you're putting everything, why you're doing it, and all this stuff. It's a way to keep it straight so that everybody doesn't get lost.
Absolutely. For sure.
And the thing with the capital stack, it was kind of funny to me because when you say capital, it means money. And when you say stack, people usually think of the biggest one. So I took it in my head like the building foundation, what they call the lodestone. The largest load-bearing stone would be the capital stack.
Yeah, maybe that's where it came from. Some building analogy. Josh, did you have any questions?
Thanks for asking, Graham. I actually don't have any questions, but I did want to point the finger back at our board. We have a number of board members here still. I also just wanted to congratulate everyone who's still here. We started with 27 and we started with 28 people and we have 24 people here now. So it's amazing that people have held on through this extremely technical training. But I did want to ask someone, I'm going to point some people out and hopefully one of you will step forward with a question or a comment. Of course, you can just say something. We have John Doherty, we have Teresa, we have Eyal, we have Tish, we have Cooney, John Shafter, Jason McKinney. Anyone have anything they would like to share? We have Tanya, Tendon, so many amazing people from the trust. Does somebody want to share something?
Yeah, my question would be more, when you mentioned earlier on that the federal government has been rumored basically since COVID started that there may be money available. from an Ottawa perspective, what are you expecting that announcement to like, and who might be qualified, and how might it help any one of our projects?
I think the projects for that particular program, and I don't know any details, just the rumors, but what I understand it to be is a program specifically for nonprofits. Well, maybe not specifically for nonprofits, but I think that they have them in mind to acquire existing apartment buildings. Right now, the National Housing Strategy is really a supply strategy. It's not an affordable housing strategy. So the programs don't really work if you just want to go, if you're a nonprofit and want to go buy an existing apartment building and now own it as the nonprofit when a market developer owned it before. You can't go to an existing National Housing Strategy program. So this would be something that would allow you to do that.
Would this be more in the form of a combination of loans, grants, and what percentage, any thoughts about where they might go in terms of percentage? Is it like 20%, 50% of the sort of equity investment?
So I think it'll be mostly loans. There may be, like with CMHC, sometimes they have a small amount of equity, but it's mostly loans. They would probably lend up to 100% of the value as long as you could cover it with your operating budget. And that comes down to your debt service coverage ratio.
And John, on the co-investment fund, the interest rates right now are coming in like extremely low, like 0.6% interest rates on for 40 years, like on a long-term 10-year term. Yeah.
So it would be part of like an analysis of looking at your operating budget, but they would go up to 100%.
And so John, like, you know, we're looking at interest rates in the 3 to 4% range. So, you know, that difference is so massive that it's almost an equivalent of equity.
Yeah.
We have a note here that John Shafter has a question.
Hi. You may have asked this earlier. I had some sign-in issues, but it's just a question about the board oversight as you go through the process of fine-tuning the budget as you move along. You know, as you demonstrated with the spreadsheet, as you get closer, it's a bit more real. You can make some more fine adjustments. Generally, would you just work with the finance committee to do that, or do you have a system where there's what's the word, an amber light that goes off to make sure that the board is aware of assumptions that you're changing?
Mm-hmm. So again, we can talk to our experience, but every project can be different. So typically with our projects, we at the beginning create something called a project charter, which outlines kind of the roles and responsibilities of all the different organizations. It's really focused on governance. When do the board and various committees make recommendations and decisions as you go through the project from the beginning right through to the construction? Who has the authority? If the costs go up and you have to make a decision about whether to pay it or not, or when you're signing a contract with an architect or applying to financing. So it's in that document, we usually have a table. We were actually just presenting one to a client this week, and it had a whole bunch of different decision points, and it talked about various committees for that client and their board, and then their staff, and then us in our role, and talked about with each of those decision points, who is, you know, who's making a recommendation, who's providing feedback, who's getting informed of the decision, and then who's making the decision. Kind of those four things. Different groups, like kind of project management 101, you could organize it in different ways, but that really
sort of a RACI chart.
Yeah, you kind of start with that at the beginning so that everybody, expectation management's huge. So start with that. And then often with our projects, as you get going, we do a monthly report because boards and committees like to meet every month. And so we kind of time it with our clients to feed in for their committees and their boards. It might just be 1 or 2 pages. And what we like to do is when we do the report, we kind of have some basic sections and use the same format every report. So that when the board sees that report the second time, the third time, the fourth time, the information gets more and more comfortable. And
Great.
what has changed every month, we just put in the old report and update it with a different colored font, like a red font. So they can, if they saw last week's report or last month's report and the previous one, they can go straight to the report and just look at the red font to see what's changed. And so there's a number of things like that. And it really depends, John, on where you are in the project in terms of risks and approvals. But for instance, in construction, you're talking about like change orders, and probably at that point you might have a staff member or somebody designated to do that. But there's a lot of different levels of that all the way through the project.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
We have a question from Tendon, who's staff at the Land Trust, asking, does the pro forma or operating budget consider the appreciation of land value over time?
It can, like, if you think of each of the tabs in the Excel document as like a schedule, you can build in many different schedules as you want to make it more sophisticated. So we really kind of provided the most, our example was like kind of the most basic components. But for instance, in a lot of our projects, we would have a tab which would be a schedule for your cash flow during your construction. And it shows when you're spending all of the costs in your capital budget and when you're getting all the money, to make sure you have the money when you spend the costs. And then what we also usually do is we take our operating budget and we do some type of longer term projection for that. It might be different for projects, but might be like a 30-year projection. And so you might project out increases in rent levels and increases in all your different operating costs, so that you know in year 1 and in year 5 and in year 10, like if you're getting a 10-year mortgage, you can kind of look forward in 10 years and be like, oh, what will our operating budget look like in 10 years? Because in 10 years, we're going to have to go out and renew or get a new mortgage. And are we going to be able to do that? And, you know, it's not always that your budget improves over time. It should, that's what you want it to do. But if you're providing affordable housing, for your budget to improve over time, you've got to increase your operating budget. That is, you have to increase your rents greater than your operating costs. And your rents, the amount that you can increase it is often governed by the province. It's often in COVID, I think it's nothing now. And in regular years, it usually is a couple of percent, but often your costs are going up, and those can go up by greater than a couple of percent. So, you know, you really do have to look at the long-term cash flow when you get into the details. As you develop your project pro forma and your project and get into it with more time, well before construction, you would develop those things, your cash flows during construction and as in operations.
Thanks so much, Graham. So we've hit our time. So I wanted to thank our amazing presenters, Graham and Anna, for sharing your knowledge and expertise and getting down into the details of financing, funding, and pro formas with discussion of partnerships. Thank you so much. And I want to thank everyone who made it to the end of this workshop and who will watch this workshop in the future. And I hope that this workshop assists you in considering your role in facilitating affordable housing projects with your organizations and in our community. Thanks so much and have a great night, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Thank you so much, Graham and Anna.
You're welcome.
Informative. Thank you.
Bye. Bye, Al. Go Raptors.
Bye, Graham.